Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today is an absolute biggie. I'm super ecstatic and thrilled to welcome James Avadeek onto the podcast. James is very much Challenger brand royalty. Someone like most listeners, I including myself, look up to in awe, really. James, in many respects, pioneered the Challenger brand movement, founding Goo Puddings in 2003. I'm sure we've all had one, mouth-watering, delicious and decadent desserts. In 2010, James sold Goo to Noble Foods for 32.5 million. And then after a brief hiatus, I suppose, away from the FMCG cauldron, James re-entered founding Coconut Collaborative, who, well, at the time of recording this, have done 20 million annualized sales. So James, thank you so much for coming on today. I really, really appreciate it.
Good to be on the show, Dan, and thank you for your very flattering remarks.
Oh, no, absolutely. It's, as I said, I think everyone listening to this really does kind of put Goo on a pedestal of the brands who kind of paved the way, if you want to say that, and allowed us to kind of create our own versions, I suppose. So where I actually want to start is, as I don't want to discuss puddings to begin with, I actually want to start with two specific things, is shoes and ski lifts. So I was reading an article and it basically said, I was 19, I had a shoe business. I sold them in the city, going around the dealing floors and taking orders. My father and grandfather had their own businesses. My twin brother, Ed, is managing director of Nokia Music. And my older brother, Will, is an inventor. We always threw ideas around. Now, this to me was quite startling in my research, I suppose, because I always believe there's something kind of sets the tone or the scene before founders go and create their main business. Could you speak to what it was like selling shoes in the city at 19? Like, what was an average day? And I suppose to follow on to that, are there any specific lessons in selling shoes that set you up for success at Goo or Coconut Collaborative?
Yeah, that was a long time ago. That was in the late 1980s. And just to sow the scene on that, there was something called Big Bang in the city, where suddenly the city of London kind of exploded with American bankers, big dealing floors. And in those days, it was obviously pre 9/11, and security was less tight than it is now. You can never do this now. So actually, you could quite easily, as a kind of hustler like me, I've always been a hustler, to be honest with you, could get in and literally go around the room and take orders for shoes. And you know, I did it because you know, I've always enjoyed the hustle and bustle of business, and obviously there was a buck to be made. I used to buy the shoes for £10 and I sold them for around £30, so it made quite a good margin. And on a good day, I'd sell probably about maybe 25, 30 pairs of shoes. So that was, in those days, that was a lot of money, especially, you know, I was only 19 or whatever. So it was a really good business while it lasted. Obviously, there was nothing to stop other people from doing exactly the same thing, and that's what happened. So competition became quite fierce, but it was great while it lasted. And you know, what did I learn? I just learned that, you know, you've got to kind of get off your backside and make things happen, and that's what I was doing. And I always think that the starting point for any kind of entrepreneurship, doesn't matter whether you're selling shoes or puddings or yogurts or whatever, is, you know, take some action, make some things happen. And obviously that's not all it takes, but that is, you know, I've never met an entrepreneur who's not action orientated, because that's the whole thing. So, you know, entrepreneurs are good talkers, but they're good doers, and probably more doing than talking, to be honest with you. So that, yeah, it was a good lesson. But then I went into, you know, kind of corporate life, because I I was at university. I went to Durham University, I had an economics degree. There was definitely pressure to get a proper job. And that's what I did. So I worked for a consultancy for a bit. And then I went to work for Safeway, the supermarket chain that sold to Morrison's. But I found big company life quite difficult because I was always kind of saying, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And everyone was saying to me, just concentrate on doing your job. So they weren't interested. So I never really I wouldn't say I was ever going to make it right to the top of a big company. I was too much of a maverick. But the good thing about working for Safeway, and then I went to work for St. Ivel, where St. Ivel was the big dairy company of the time. It was kind of milk, cream, yogurt, margarine, and so on, desserts. And that's where I learned the chill foods business. That was really useful, and part of that is I was sent to Belgium to start up our business in Belgium for St. Ivel. And I suppose when you move to a new market and no one's heard of your business, it doesn't matter whether you work for Unilever or you're starting something up. It's still the same thing. You've got to you've got to show quite a lot of initiative, and you're at a startup. The fact is, it's financed by someone else. And I realized that actually this was kind of, I suppose the early part of the 21st century, so kind of 2001, 2. And I thought, you know what, I just want to do this for myself now. I don't need a big company, and in fact, they kind of get in the way. And why should? And I'd always wanted to do it, so that was the time. And I'd done my apprenticeship. I'd done kind of, 15 to 18 years or whatever in the food business. So I kind of knew I knew my stuff in terms of how the trade worked, how chilled foods works, and so on. So when I had the idea for Goo, it was just like, well, why don't I do this myself? And to be honest, as a result of that, that was the starting point. By the way, it wasn't that simple. So I was in Belgium at the time, and I had this idea because I was trying to sell margarine, and no one's interested in margarine. And I used to go to this patisserie next to my office, and I just thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to wrap up in a brand what these guys are doing, beautiful artisanal chocolate desserts, which they did beautifully, but I'm going to create a brand around that. It seemed a very good idea at the time. But I did nothing with it. I just basically talked about it because everyone said, oh, it's too risky, starting your own business, too risky, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually I was skiing with my elder brother, who has some very successful friends, all who have, they're hedge funders or whatever. And I used to dread the question, so Jim, what are you doing now? And I thought, oh God, I don't want to tell them I'm selling margarine. So I said, oh, well, actually, I've got a puddings business. I've just started it. And I said, oh, where can we find it? And I said, well, I'm talking to all the top supermarkets, it's going to launch this summer. And anyway, because I'd said it, I woke up the next day and said, right, I've actually got to do this. So that was the starting point. That was the seed of Goo. And then, that was 2003 when I started it. Goo's a big business now. It was bought for, I sold it for, well, I didn't get 32 million, by the way. I got, I had partners and investors and so on. So I got a a significant chunk, but not I'm by no means as rich as people think I am. But I, you know, I then kind of, I think the point is that all of these businesses, which are well-known brands now, all start as, small ideas and kind of which are put together in a fairly random way. And it's gonna, I guess you get to hear the stories of the genesis of these brands, but most of them, like Goo, are kind of they happen in a fairly chaotic way, and it starts in a fairly precarious way, and it's by no means a straight line. So, what appears a very slick, well thought through brand, I can tell you, Goo had its fair share of ups and downs, and especially right at the start, it was. I launched it. Well, the starting point, by the way, is that when I tried to sell it in, the UK had just gone to war with Iraq for the second time. And we all thought that we were going to get blanketed with Scud missiles at the time. This was 2003. And the supermarkets were really, batting down the hatches, thinking, okay, well, this is going to be, we just got to freeze all new listings, just focus on what we do. That's always whenever something difficult happens, basically all innovation stops. I managed to just get it listed in the nick of time before there was a freeze on all new products. I mean, and it was like a week, it's incredible how, the difference between things working and not working, it's a very fine line. I always think it's a bit like a tennis game where it can all hinge on one point. And, in our case, we had various things. So we managed to get it launched, and it launched in May 2003. But these were kind of very heavy chocolate desserts. And I found myself in the middle of a heat wave. Because the summer of 2003 was very, very hot. And so it didn't work for the first 3 months. In fact, it was a complete disaster Goo. And I remember all of the supermarkets saying, sorry, yeah, really nice idea, James, but yeah, it's not really working. Well done though, but we're going to have to take it out in the next review, which was the end of October. And luckily in September, the heat wave came to an end, and it became kind of shitty weather. And it started selling like hotcakes, and then everything always changes because success, is infectious. And I'm not saying it was then a straight line, but we then had a brand which everyone became more interested in, and it just gained momentum. So that's really the starting point.
Yeah, and there's so much in that, James, that I think listeners will relate to. I think the main thing for me there is, especially with lots of people listening to this, will want to go and set up their own business immediately. But actually, what you did there of getting the time under your belt with those businesses in the food and drink space, working for Safeway, when you actually went in, I think it makes it much easier. Yeah. To know what you're talking about. And I one of the things that pains me the most is seeing these nascent brands who have a great idea, but they don't have kind of the commercial acumen, or just don't know the kind of the way of the kind of the grocery world per se, that they end up, their business becomes stifled. So I think anyone listening to that listening to this is just absolutely fine to go and work for someone else and just get that experience under your belt. Is so important. But there was two things you said there, which is really interesting. So the first you said was, take some action. All entrepreneurs take action. Action trumps everything. But what I also found really fascinating is you sat on Goo for 2 years. If correct me wrong.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And then something, when you're on that chairlift and your brother's friend said to you, "Oh, what do you do?" Right? Something happened within James that then, right, fuck it, I'm going to do this. And could you speak to that? Because there'll be lots of listeners who have an idea, but they're just paralyzed to take action.
Mm.
What happened on that ski lift? I'm really mesmerized.
Well, that's an interesting question. What's the psychology? The psychology is we all want to be proud of what we do. And, you know, I think one thing about startups is they're quite interesting. And obviously, if you're, I've always been business minded. So I never really liked telling people I worked for a margarine company. You know, it wasn't something that I was particularly proud of. So, you know, I think what was I doing? I was saying what I wanted to be. I was talking about my fantasy, if you like. And, you know, look, life is short. We're dead a long time. And, you know, I think we've got, this sounds suddenly all philosophical, but we've got 40 years of basically business, or, you know, typically 40 to 45 years. And therefore we've got to make the best of it. And I think your listeners, and, you know, certainly from my point of view, I really wanted to kind of do something different. I think the good thing is these days is that, you know, if it doesn't work, you can just basically lick your wounds and get back on the horse and do something else. And what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, you can go back and become a lawyer, or, you know, go and join a company. And, as you know, I think failure or business failure is not as kind of shunned as it used to be. And certainly, I think that's come from America, where people say, well, if you haven't failed, you haven't, you know, you haven't learned anything. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I've certainly had failures along the way, and kind of decisions that, you know, I've made and they've been the wrong decisions. So I know what failure tastes like. I hate it. I hate it. Of course I do. Interestingly, I think the only people who really talk about failure are the people who have overcome it and been successful, because failure is still kind of, it's got a stigma around it.
What's been the most painful failure that has then set you up for future success? Like maybe taught you a pretty pivotal lesson?
I think recently, and I wouldn't call it a failure, I would say that it's, you know, I have, when I've expanded overseas, I've been probably too gung-ho about, you know, replicating the success in the UK and other markets. And I think overseas markets are quite challenging. It's, you know, effectively you're starting again. So I've learned a lot. I mean, I've gone into lots of markets. I've gone into France, I've gone into Germany. I've had successes in both of those markets. I've gone into America. America's a tough market, and it's certainly for us taken longer than we wanted, and we've invested a lot more than we probably expected to. Yeah, so I know what I know what it's like. I think the other thing, going back to, you know, lessons of entrepreneurship is don't give up. You know, and there's a very good cartoon with a stork with a frog in its mouth, and the frog is kind of pushing the stork's beaks, you know, basically saying never, you know, whatever happens, never ever give up.
I love that. Absolutely.
I suppose we can see that with what's happening with Boris Johnson in Downing Street at the moment. You know, he's fighting for his life, isn't he? Or for survival. And there's nothing like, you know, really fighting for something that, you know, if you survive, then it's great. You know, you've survived another day. I suppose the only thing with that is that sometimes you have got to, if you are really, you know, if you're just delaying the inevitable, then you've got to give up and move on. So I don't think, you know, but I do think the fighting spirit and what I would call resilience I think an entrepreneur has to be optimistic and resilient in equal measure. And those are two key things, because anybody's business, whatever it is, things will go wrong. And actually it's the people who, obviously not just, you've got to be able to deal with that. You can't just, obviously experience helps. 15 years in the chilled food industry helps, because you can draw on, what you've learned. But yeah, you've got to be, it's tough. So I've got utmost respect for anybody who starts, any business, to be honest, because, I don't think, I talk to a lot of people, and I don't think anybody has had an easy run, and if they say they have, they're probably bluffing, because, things aren't that easy generally.
No, that's absolutely brilliant. So a couple of things on that. So people listening to this will be going through struggles in their business. Probably that's why they're listening to it in part. But in terms of you need to have fighting resilience, how could you speak to a moment which was really, really hard, and how you cultivated that resilience to pull through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not saying I've had a really tough life, but, I was brought up in the 70s and 80s. And, I was at a pretty tough school, or tough two schools, where, survival was a big achievement. But it was you survived the world of knocks. I'm not saying my childhood was any different to anybody else's. I think I learned resilience from my childhood, but also from my father, who was an incredibly resilient guy, who basically overcame all sorts of challenges in his life. And he kind of, gave me that fighting spirit. And I think that's, psychologically, you learn a lot from your parents, don't you? You inherit all of their weaknesses, and you inherit their strengths as well. And hopefully you do a few of your own.
No, absolutely. So funny enough, that was another theme I wanted to explore was your childhood, especially because, one of your brothers is an inventor, and one was the MD of Nokia. I kind of see this contrarian creativity in your household as a child. So what did your father do out of interest? And how do you think your childhood created this sense of, as you said at the beginning, like mavericks, if that makes sense?
Well, I mean, firstly, I should kind of update you. So my twin brother, Ed, was the MD of Nokia Music for a short period of time. He was in business with Peter Gabriel, the rock musician, and they had a kind of digital music platform that was bought by Nokia Music. I don't know whether Nokia Music still exists. That was quite a corporate environment, and Ed was not a corporate guy. And actually, he didn't last more than about 2 years at Nokia, and now he's in the food business. My older brother, Will, I mean, when I say he's an inventor, he was an entrepreneur. So he was an engineer, a very, very good engineer. He was at Cambridge. He then went to work in America when he left university. And then he founded a particle flow measurement business. It was a kind of instrument. I mean, he's a very clever guy, and but a good businessman as well. He then built that up and subsequently sold it. But in terms of my father's business, I mean, he was in the kind of textile business, which was tough. And in fact, we had a family woolen mill in Bradford, you know, in the kind of, I suppose, up to the 1960s, before I was born.
Mm.
And my father was basically, you know, in the family business. He was the export manager, as he's traveled all over the world, selling basically suiting cloth. And then when I was, you know, when I suppose I started, you know, I was born in 65. Yeah, so you can work out how old I am. But the business unfortunately went bust, like so many of these woolen mills. You know, basically the Far East became much cheaper, and, you know, the whole of the textile industry in Yorkshire became very, very difficult, and a lot of companies folded, including our business. That was, you know, about the time I was born. And then my father got a job near Cambridge, where we grew up. Yeah, he started as the sales director of a kind of textile business. It was actually in the shoe industry. And so, yeah, but it was tough. It was a struggle for him. And he never, you know, my dad, it was, he didn't have a GU, he didn't have a coconut collaborative idea. I think it was very much kind of commodity type business. And, but, you know, he was a good sales guy. And I learned from him about how to sell. And, you know, he used to talk about his business a lot. And, you know, thank God it was before the world of mobile phones and stuff. So actually people sat around the dinner table and talked rather than kind of swiped. And, you know, I was from an early age very interested in business. And so I suppose I always wanted one day to do it. And that's what happened. But yeah, I learned a lot from my dad. And, you know, ultimately my dad wasn't particularly successful. You know, his business, he had to close it in the end. But along the way, I learned a lot from him. And as I say, he was an incredibly resilient guy, and always, you know, even when things went wrong, he kept this kind of optimistic view, which was, yeah, I can do it, you know. And I think I learned that from him.
No, it's so interesting, because I think, as you said at the beginning, you inherit the good bits and the bad bits from your parents. But I find it so interesting how, you know, you've got three brothers who are entrepreneurs. It's quite a rare thing. And I suppose the resilience and maybe your dad's potential, like him having to close his business, gave you guys the incessant drive to do your own thing and be ridiculously successful at that. Do you think that's where that's potentially come from?
To a certain extent, you know, we wanted to kind of finish the job that my dad started.
No, that's amazing.
You know, from a generational point of view. Yeah. Yeah.
So James, on something that you said earlier, which listeners will find super valuable, especially when it comes to export. You said some of your mistakes were trying to we'll go gung-ho with export. So we at Moneylife are sort of dipping our toes into export, but it does seem like this kind of enigma in some respects. It seems straightforward, but utterly complex at the same time. So you said America was really tough to go into. Like, why is that? Because in my eyes, you know, GU or coconut collaborative, especially coconut collaborative, the Americans would absolutely love that. What was so hard?
Well, no, that's right, Dan. And it's an interesting question. America is obviously a huge market, 350 million people. Well, we were about 70 million people. So, you know, 5 times the size. And, you know, they're pretty, you know, they're a bit richer than we are. So, you know, in theory, the opportunity is there. In practice, it's not so much that they don't like our products, they love our products, but there are enormous barriers to entry in America, which around the kind of route to market, the investment required, it's very fragmented as a market. So there were a few big players, but there were lots of regional players. And it's much more of a kind of, if you like, it's much more a market that's suited to huge companies with huge resources. So in other words, the cost barriers to entry, I mean, I say this, I suppose it's from economics, are much higher than the UK. One of the great things about the UK market is that, you've basically got, I don't know, 5 or 6 supermarket chains that give you complete coverage of the market. And although I'm not, the UK is a tough market in terms of convincing retailers to back you, and you've obviously got to have an incredibly well thought through business plan, a product which is, significantly different to others, and so on. But once you've actually launched, you don't need huge numbers of people to get out there and visit the stores. Tesco, if they back you, they will put you into, let's say, 200 stores to start off with, and that on the day of launch, it will go into 200 stores. We're very disciplined in this country. We benefit from the supermarkets are highly centralized. That isn't the case in America. It's not the case in France. It's not the case in Germany. So we have probably the most sophisticated food supply chain business in the world, in this country. I don't think a lot of people know that, but the UK consumer is incredibly well served. So in theory, UK companies should, be able to kind of, take their ideas elsewhere, and as well as supermarket chains. But of course, it's never easy. America is not an easy market. It's the most competitive market in the world. So when I went to America with our coconut yogurt, and our product is much better than anyone else's, it's like, well, you can't launch everywhere. You've got to just launch in one region. And then you find out that there are you've got to deal with a broker, you've got a distributor. It's not, you've got to visit all the stores. So actually the cost actually mounts up, and it becomes a much slower burn. So what I've realized in America is that it takes a long time to get going. It's a bit like pushing a boulder uphill. And when you finally you achieve a kind of escape velocity, you can grow like Topsy, because they suddenly put you everywhere, and but to get to that point, it often takes many years. Whilst in the UK, you can actually grow much quicker. But I suppose after a while, you do run out of population and stores. The good thing in America is that once you've kind of got that escape, I call it escape velocity, which is a proven business model, which everyone, you've got the coverage, you've got the brand right, you've got the customer right, and then it's just a question of rolling it out. It takes much longer in America to get to that point.
I never.
Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, I never thought that, because I had a friend who went to the Whole Foods in New York, and I suppose it's true. Because America's such a creative place with just so many interesting people, and there's this kind of like osmosis within these areas that you create all these amazing brands. I was looking at the kombucha section. I was like, oh my God, compared to what we've got over here. So it's kind of got this glitzy, romantic appeal to it, but actually when you get into the weeds and the nuts and bolts, it sounds like a bit of a nightmare. So just because listeners,
actually, Dan, I wouldn't say it's a nightmare. I would say
Right.
it's a long-term project, which is very expensive. So we've persisted. We've now kind of focused on desserts only.
Right.
And actually, I can now see that we are getting to the point where we can, we've got good rate of sale. We've got good results in the stores that we're in. So, 3 years later, we are getting to the point where I think we can begin to take off. But during that, I guess my point is not to put people off America. I don't want to put people off America. I love America. And I'm still glad that we're there. But I underestimated the amount of time and cost of going into that market. I still believe in it. And I think actually, if you play the long game and you've got a product which, is different to everyone else, it's exactly the same. Ultimately, you can win, and you can win big. But don't think that it's going to happen overnight in America. It doesn't. It's a long-term game.
No, for sure. And I think, speaking for ourselves at Manilife, and I'm sure people listening to this, you think on the journey to getting your first 3 or 4 big grocery accounts, that you could just almost put a bit of energy into a different country and the same effect or results will happen. What we've learned the hard way is it is just way slower. Like it does take long. So I think seeing export as a slow burn, long-term opportunity is brilliant. But understanding that it's not something that's going to sort of, well, as you said earlier, I didn't realize how lucky we are in the UK with how strict and disciplined the retailers are with getting the product to store, with getting it on shelf, with the compliance, etc. No, that's really interesting.
There are some. If you're going to go for an export markets or overseas markets, there are there's other lower hanging fruit.
Such as?
Well, I think markets like Dubai are good markets for UK brands. Funnily enough, I think France is quite a good market for UK brands. Ireland obviously is, our neighbours, so but different retailers, but that's an obvious place. And then you've got even further afield, you've got Hong Kong, Singapore, Australasia, and other European markets. I mean, Scandinavia is a good market. They're quite Anglo-Saxon. I mean, different in the sense that very pure, prefer Scandinavian made brands, but still good markets. So I think, if I was going to advise other brands where to go first, I would probably say, well, look, if you've got tons of unlimited money, yes, go and have a crack at America, and you'll enjoy it as well. If you're doing it on a shoestring, which often brands do, don't go to America. Go to other markets where you can do it step by step.
That's brilliant. And I think you've segued nicely to our next point with the Scandinavia reference. But I'd love to talk about 2 people I've learned who are quite integral to both your journeys at Goo and Coconut Collaborative. The first is Perry Hayden Taylor. So he's been a guest on this podcast. He's an absolute legend, such great storyteller. I'd love for you to please tell listeners the story of how you met Perry and kind of how he embodied and brought Goo to life. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's quite a well told story, this. So many they might have heard it before, but basically I went to Perry with I don't know if any of your listeners might know of the chocolate souffle of Goo. It was the kind of hero product at the start. It's a beautiful product, actually. It's more a fondant if you're a kind of pure chef. and you basically stick it in the oven and you reheat it. It's a half-baked souffle. You reheat it and you get a lovely kind of crust of chocolate on top, and then you dig in, you get the beautiful kind of chocolate lava underneath, and it was a great product. And we developed this and we took it to Perry and we said, look, we need a brand for this. He liked it. I didn't have any money at the time. So I said to Perry, I need a brand. I don't have any cash. Can you do something? And he took a punt on me, to be honest. Anyway, so yeah, I don't normally do this, James, but you know what? I like the product, and I think we'd get on well. This was back in 2002, and so he started. So I left it with him, and he called me up about 2 weeks later or something, and said, "Look, I think you need to come in." And I went in, and he had this kind of fancy boardroom where big screens and everything else. And I sat down, and he had this image of this brand called Goo on the screen. He said, "I've just come across this product in Scandinavia," and it was the Goo packaging, with the Goo with the umlaut over the U, and a beautiful picture of this product. And it was like, oh my God, someone's beaten me to it. It's like arriving at the South Pole and there's another flag there, kind of thing. I thought this was an original idea that no one else had thought of, but there was a brand that was already selling. Anyway, I said, God, that's brilliant. I've never come across it, but game over, kind of thing. And he kind of smiled and he said, no, don't worry. This is your brand. I created this for you. So that was a very good way of selling me the brand and presenting the new brand. He's good at that, Perry. He's a genius.
He really is. He really is. I think a nexus of this conversation is everyone is in sales fundamentally. Like you obviously got all that sales kind of learnings when you're doing the shoe sales in the city, and Perry really is. He's so creative, but he's so good at selling stuff. He's just got this ability to tell stories and just be passionate. I took this from the Big Fish website. So for listeners, Big Fish is Perry's branding marketing agency. And he said, James approached us in 2005. He was intent on calling it the Belgian Chocolate Company. We told him in no uncertain terms how dull that was. It sounded like something targeted at grannies who smelt of lavender talc, and that everyone would be bored to death. But this is what I'm really interested in exploring. He says, thankfully, he had a sense of humor and agreed with us. Now, I haven't actually explored this yet on the podcast, but I know lots of listeners intertwine their self-worth with their business worth, which can be quite dangerous. How have you implemented having a sense of humor, whether it's through failures or tumultuous times, to kind of steady the ship from a leadership perspective, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure it does make total sense. So tell me what you mean by that.
So Perry said, thankfully, James had a sense of humor and agreed with us, right?
Yes.
When it came to the branding,
yeah,
changing it from the Belgian Chocolate Company to Goo. Now, I think within, founders can take their business super seriously, and I'm not saying I'm not saying they shouldn't.
Yes,
but I think
I see what you mean.
Yeah,
I think the point is not so much a sense of humor, but being open to ideas and open to criticism and suggestion. And with Perry's got you've had him on your show, so he's a very entertaining guy, and most people will enjoy having a meeting with him, and he's become a good friend of mine, and we always have a great laugh, which makes his philosophy in life is that you start by having a good time, and then there's kind of, I think he says, earn, learn, and have fun, and that's his big thing. For me, I think, yeah, I think the point is whether you have a good sense of humor or not. The key thing is being open to ideas and open to, if you like, criticism, and open to, being flexible and changing when you need to. And it was very clear to me that, I wouldn't say I was a marketing genius. Certainly, when I started GU, I was more of a sales guy. I probably still am, to be honest with you. But anybody who sees GU, anybody who sees that branding thinks, God, that's so much better. And it's just a kind of immediate reaction of, I remember Perry kind of had this thing that with brands, you make a promise and you keep a promise. And those are the two key elements of brands. The brand name and the packaging, that makes a promise, and then the product keeps the promise when people buy it and taste it. So, and obviously that worked very well with GU. It looks the business and it tastes the business. So, in terms of sense of humor, yeah, I mean, look, I enjoy myself and I enjoy life, and I'm not saying it's easy all the time, but I try and keep it light with my team and stuff, and we have a good time. But I think the key to success is being fairly, open to ideas and criticism, not getting too stuck, because things move quickly and you've got to move with the times. And I suppose the one thing with that is that, and it's something I'm not very good at, because I'm probably the easiest guy to sell to. If you've got a well thought through argument, come and talk to Jim. He'll probably buy into it. So I think you've got to have some things that you actually fundamentally believe in. You don't want to change. But for something like the branding and so on, I thought, right, this guy knows what he's doing. I'm going to follow it, which is what I did.
And how did you meet Perry in the first place?
I met him through a guy called Charlie Bigham, who everyone knows now because he's got he's a famous ready meals producer. So I knew Charlie.
He's gone in here as well.
Okay, yeah, he's a great guy, Charlie. I mean, he's
really good guy.
Incredibly successful. So Perry actually, is responsible for many successes in the shelf today. So he's got a long list of good brands.
Now, he's an absolute hero. The next person I want to talk about is Motti. And I listened to this, podcast where you said, Motti was your business partner, but you said Motti and I transformed each other's lives. I kind of want to use that as, I suppose, the launch pad. How did Motti transform your life, whether in business or personal? And how do you think you transformed Motti's life?
Yeah, I have to say it. I don't talk. Motti's a much more private person than I am, so I don't tend to talk about him that much because he certainly doesn't seek publicity. The only thing I'd say about him is that I've been in business with Motti for 18 years, and we are very different people, but we are kind of have a similar approach to business. We bring different ideas to things, and he was both of us were he had a patisserie where he was making desserts for the airlines. The airline business is quite tough, so the success of GU certainly transformed his business. And at the same time, it obviously gave me a great opportunity as well. So, we have been successful together, and he is now the main investor in my new bit in the Cake Nut Collaborative. So, we've been a good partnership, and partnerships are difficult, but Motti and I has endured, and I think that's all I'll say.
No. No. I completely respect that. Completely respect that. I suppose what would be interesting, and we don't have to go into specifics. Again, listeners will be either looking for a co-founder, i.e., they're really good at sales, they need an ops person, vice versa. But as you say, there can be a lot of strain and tension in co-founder partnerships. What do you think are the one or two things that have made yours and Motti's partnership so fruitful? And it doesn't have to be specific.
Well, the starting point is trust. So you have got to trust your partner, and you've got to be straight, and you know, without that, partnerships fail. I think the other, you know, the next key point is that you've got different strengths and you bring different things to the party. And I suppose the final element is that, you know, I think patience and understanding, and, you know, anybody who gets carried away with their own ego in business tends to hit the buffers quite, you know, at some stage. So if you're in a partnership, you've got to kind of, you know, it's a bit like a marriage, you've got to give and take. And I think patience and understanding and communication is all important. And look, there are lots of successful partnerships, and there are lots of ones that don't work. And so I'm not saying that I know any of the answers. All I can say is that I've had a very good, you know, relationship and success with Motti over the years, and it's a good combination.
For sure. And I suppose trust is an interesting thing. So did you, when you first met, because I'm just trying to imagine, say a listener's is meet someone at a trade show or at an event, and they, you know, they want him or her to come on board. Did you trust your gut with Motti, or was there, because it in the very nascent stages of a partnership?
Yes, of course. Yeah. No, I mean, look, I didn't know him, so we were, you know, we were lucky in the sense that I think we were both decent people who were ambitious and wanted to make, you know, to change things. So, but obviously at the start, you know, I didn't know him, he didn't know me, and we both took a, you know, kind of plunge, if you like.
Amazing. No, I think it's well, for people listening to this, it's trust your gut, but the kind of the give and take thing is really interesting as well.
I think the only thing, as I say, I would say to you know, your listeners, is that in a lot of cases partnerships don't work, and I think if you're going to start a brand, don't underestimate your, you know, I think if you're a sales and marketing guy, which I believe you really have to be to start a business, the other skills that you know you need, you can, you know, you can develop yourself, or you can get people around you. So don't underestimate what you can do yourself. So if you can go it alone, I couldn't go it alone because I didn't have anywhere to make my products. And the manufacturer of my products was so critical. So, you know, at the outset, I needed a partner. Now, actually, for the next business, because I'd worked with Motti before, and we'd built up success together, and therefore we'd built up success and trust and so on, but trust grows over time. You know, he was the natural partner for my next venture. But in my next venture, I don't have a factory, so you know, we did it in a sense as more of a joint investors in the business. So, you know, don't feel that you need automatically to go out and find a co-founder, because, you know, maybe you can still do it yourself and, you know, raise money elsewhere. And crowdfunding is a brilliant way of raising money for these businesses. And some ways I wish I'd done that. And I can see some brands are brilliant at raising money. I've never been, I wouldn't say I was, I never spent enough time doing that side of things. I was always more interested in the actual business itself. But some people astound me with their ability to raise money at fantastic valuations on actually a very, fairly, what's quite a nascent business. But that is a skill in itself.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that every episode I do, there's one common theme that eventually begins to emerge as the conversation unfolds. And I think the key thing I'm learning from you, James, is everyone has got to sell, whether you like it or not, whether it's you selling shoes in London, or, meeting Perry and him selling to you, or meeting Motti and you kind of selling the dream of Goo. It's all so interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of growth, right? Lots of guests, including Charlie, actually have said there's two stages to growth at the hardest. The first is going from 0 to 1 million retail sales.
Yeah.
And the second is going from, I would say, kind of 5 or 6 to 20 million, or even to 10 million. It's that jump, because once you get to 5 or 6, you've got the distribution. It's just about growing that. So what I want to ask you is, if you were to go on the Goo or Coconut collaborative journey from that 0 to 1 million stage, what would you do differently and why?
No, I wouldn't do many things differently, for starters. The way I think about it is that when you have a business like mine, it's a bit like a lump of clay on a wheel, okay? And you basically mold it into, you've got a brand, you've got maybe a first customer, but you've got to, if you watch people making pottery, the whole time they never let go of it. They're always kind of shaping it. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what you've got to do when you start a business. And people make the mistake that, or there's a kind of school of thought, which is that, okay, I've got to have a fantastic brand, and I've then got to get it into Tesco or Sainsbury's or whatever, and then I've cracked it. The reality is that that's right at the, unfortunately, that of course that's important, but then you've just got to keep on adapting, molding, getting the right people in, setting up the systems. You know from your own experience that none of this is easy, and the companies that make it aren't necessarily the first companies into the market. The first companies into the market have an advantage as long as they use that advantage and scale and invest and get the right team and all that kind of stuff. In other words, they use their first mover advantage to scale quicker than anyone else. But if they don't, if they simply get in there and then they're, let's say they're in Ocado and Whole Foods and maybe possibly Waitrose or whatever, but they don't then really innovate, or the product's too expensive for the mass market, they're not going to go anywhere beyond where they are, which is why you've got to keep on kind of thinking, how can I make this a household name? How can I really scale this? And obviously there are different, you can't get there overnight, but every business that is ultimately successful has kind of made this transition from a kind of, if you like, early adopters who love new stuff, who always try new ideas and stuff, into the kind of more mass market where people kind of frankly don't change their habits that quickly. And it's a much, when you're going into Sainsbury and Tesco and then beyond Asda and Morrison's, you've really got to have something which is much more mass market. It doesn't have to be cheap, but it's got to be scalable. And otherwise, you never end up growing. Do you see what I mean? So I've seen plenty of businesses that have a brilliant initial idea. They have early success. Everyone raves about them or whatever. They've got lots of them, but then they don't scale it properly. Why don't they scale it properly? Well, they probably didn't get the right team of people into the business, or maybe they're too egocentric, so they don't let go enough, and they're too stuck in their ways or whatever. And I can think of quite a few examples. But I think the companies, and obviously Charlie is a classic example of this, where he launches a really good premium product, goes into Waitrose, very successful in Waitrose, and now it's successful everywhere. And he's got a business that's probably selling, well, it's certainly a household name now. And he's played a long-term game, hasn't he? So he's been in business for, well, I think 20 years now, or maybe even longer.
No, it's,
so,
I mean,
yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
No, so I think the general point is, yeah, it's good to get in early, but you've just got to keep on thinking of that, how are you going to turn this into something which is a kind of, has the ability to become a household name that people will talk about, that you have a chance that if you're walking in the street in London, you might see a bit of your own packaging on the street, which has been discarded as rubbish. That's a sign that things are happening. Or when you go and it's not just a kind of product that you and your group of friends would buy, that is talked about by much more, if you like, kind of a much wider section of society, because that's what you need to make it work. And I think the thing is that there it's about really working out what the price point that you can get to is. So for a particular product, and every product is different, but you've got to be kind of in the ballpark, because if you charge, let's say if you charge more than £2, and I think £2 is even, or maybe even £1.50 for a single portion of yogurt, you're not going to get that kind of escape velocity. If you so every market has its kind of has this if you like a kind of range of from the cheapest to the most expensive, and within that, what can what's the maximum you can charge in Sainsbury or Tesco, whatever. I think you need to be aware of those kind of things, because then you stand a chance of becoming more mainstream.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because this is, to be honest, well, there's a few things on that. So I loved the analogy of like the kind of the pottery, because what Charlie said when he came on is, he said, my mantra from day one is 1% better, every day, every week, every month, plus time equals is a great business. And I think that is that molding. You're constantly iterating, tweaking as you are trying to unlock more and more growth. In terms of the price point, do you think, because lots of brands, including Moneylife, we go in trying to premiumize a category because we are a new concept, better ingredients. Do you think to get to that household, to move from challenger to household brand, is price, getting the price right, the main thing? And are there any other factors that either in the marketing or the team that made Goo go from, I suppose, challenger brand to household brand?
Yeah, no, good question. I think let's just talk about challenger brands, because you could argue that Goo is still a challenger brand. Yeah, it is well known now. It's got high brand awareness. The issue with Goo is that it's and actually the reason we probably sold Goo when we did was that it had high brand awareness but very low frequency. So when you ask people how often they actually bought goo, everyone had heard of it. Everyone loves goo. But people say, oh, actually, yeah, I had one maybe last Christmas or, last Easter or whatever. So the challenge of goo, because it's a very rich product, is getting people to buy it regularly. The good thing about the yogurt market is that yogurt is a much more, everyday item. So, with the Coconut Collab, we've got obviously a lower brand awareness, but we've actually got a much higher frequency. And therefore, there's much more room for growth, because it's just a question of the market, getting more penetration. Once we've got the penetration, people are going to eat it more often. Do you see what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
But every market has this, and every category of product will have this price range within it. And I can't tell you exactly what it is. I don't know what it is for peanut butter, but you've got to kind of be in the ballpark, because if you're not, I'm not saying that's the, if you don't get that right, you will not grow. It's interesting looking at brands that have made it. And I would put Innocent's probably the best example. They launched a smoothie, a single serve smoothie. When it was launched, I think it sold for 180, 179, 20 years ago. I think it's probably still selling for £1.79, or maybe even cheaper for a single now. But the way they scaled the business was they moved that into the bigger formats. So they launched a Tetra, if you remember, and suddenly a Tetra is something you keep in your fridge. So you suddenly got the big take-home business, and then they go into kids' products, and then they go into orange juice and apple juice. By that stage, they've established the brand well enough that it's a kind of, it's a premium. So the choice is between Innocent versus Tropicana. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think every category is gradually premiumizing over time, because consumers always are looking for something healthier, slightly tastier, more natural, these days more sustainable. So there's always an opportunity to move the needle. Do you know what I mean? But you can't just go, if you go in at twice the price of someone else, you're not going to get the penetration. You're certainly not you might get away with it in Whole Foods or, some of the delis, but unfortunately there's not much business there. And actually here's another interesting thing. And this is where America is an interesting market, is that there's a much bigger natural food sector in America than there is in the UK. And that's on the back of Whole Foods, which is enormous in America, but is tiny in the UK. And there's plenty of other, so the natural channel, and the natural channel is where you can charge £10 for a pot of peanut butter and people will pay for it.
Yeah, sure.
Whatever it is, I don't know whether it's £10 or £8 or £6, but I do know that in Tesco, I suspect £2.50 is about, the limit. So, I think that's the different.
That's fine, don't worry.
The key thing. Sorry.
We'll just wait for the dog.
Let's just wait.
That's fine.
This is your fault for the rest now. Then you can keep it. Yeah, absolutely. Go on, Fletch. Fletch. You probably want to come now. Probably, right. Yeah, sorry, Dan. Yeah, what I was saying there is in America, there's a much bigger natural, well, they call it the natural speciality channel, where you can kind of charge this premium. In the UK, there isn't. The mainstream supermarkets, basically serve that quality function. So you can't go crazy on pricing. And that's, I think, one of the key differences. It's interesting when I look at our competitors in America, and I look at some of the products they're selling over there, it's just ridiculously expensive, and they wouldn't stand a chance over here because no one is going to buy a pot of overnight oats for $5, which is about almost £4. No one's going to do that. But this is a kind of $30 million business in America. So, in each market it's different. In this country, the supermarkets, I think, have done a great job in actually combining quality with reasonable pricing, which is why I've always said the British consumer is incredibly well served.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think I suppose it's a pertinent lesson for me and definitely for listeners, in that you've kind of, in the early stages, in the nascent stages, from maybe 1 to 5 mil, is you've got this romantic kind of premium. As you said, everything's getting premiumized. You can say that for many instances, but it comes to a point when you've got to cross the chasm from challenger to household brand, which, look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I think most of us want to do this essentially. I think you've got to be clever about your pricing, be super innovative with your MPD, like Innocent, like yourselves at Coconut Collaborative. It's really interesting. And I also think this whole thing you said at Go about high brand awareness, but low frequency, is something I hadn't actually thought about. It's such a decadent product. I just thought, and obviously, people do pick up loads, otherwise it's done so well. But I thought you'd be selling more of them. It was really interesting. Have you got a dead pause at one, James?
I have, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Perfect. We'll wrap up with a few questions then. So, what I want to talk about to kind of end with is building teams. Lots of guests, including Charlie and Perry, have said that hiring teams, or the right team, is one of the hardest battles. And we've talked about going from that journey from challenger to household brand. We talked about price, MPD, etc. In terms of hiring the right team to fulfill that journey, could you speak to that? Like, what are the 1 to 2 traits you look for in hiring, either at Coconut Collaborative or Goo?
Yeah, sure. I think there are a few things here. I mean, the positive thing is that working for a startup is no longer a weird thing to do. So a lot of graduates these days like the idea of working for a startup. So the universe of people that would be interested in working for you is bigger than it used to be, because when I started Goo, no graduate would want to risk working for us. It was like, what? No way. It's far too small, far too risky. These days, graduates are actually openly like working for startups. It's like, oh yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I want to work for a startup.
No, definitely.
And so, obviously, when you hire graduates, you're hiring enthusiasm and intelligence, but not experience. So I think the key thing I've learned is that at different phases in a company, you need different types of people, and but always you'd be looking for the kind of characteristics of of people that you want to be kind of fighting in the trenches with you. And I think, a positive attitude, a can-do kind of thing goes a long way. You can teach, as long as people are kind of, anybody who's got a university degree is going to be, can pick up the intellectual sides of it. Do you know what I mean? And the experience they can learn from doing. But don't expect that you can kind of delegate immediately. It's extraordinary how much experience actually counts, or having been in the situation before and know how to deal with something. So, obviously, be careful what to expect from people at the start. But, in terms of the types of people, I always prioritize attitude and kind of, the type of person over necessarily experience or whatever. But as the company gets bigger, obviously you do need people who know the ropes. And we're lucky now, and the same thing happened at GU. At GU, I think I have one of the best teams in the food industry. I mean, phenomenal people who are now kind of, one of my guys is running Huel. He's the chief executive of Huel, which is an incredible business. Another one is running the kind of the brand, the kind of supermarket side of Wagamama. Phenomenal person. Another one founded one of the best yogurt companies in the UK, The Collective. Another one is now, I think, the chief commercial officer of Asda. GU's people who and they didn't all join me at the start, but on the way, we attracted some really good talent, and it's exactly the same now at the Coconut Collab. We've got a really good team of people who I think can take on the world, to be honest. And the key thing, hire smart people, but prioritize attitude and work ethic over necessarily experience. Make it a fun place to work, because I think that's what people are looking for. I mean, I like to have a good time. I know my team, a big part of their social life is actually hanging out in the office with guys and, with the rest of the team. So, I think there are a few lessons in hiring people, and I think that is a critical part of the success of any business, is the kind of talent that you bring into the business. And I think there's also a realization that some people need to move on. They can work there for a few years or whatever, but then, they need to move on, and you need to keep on reinvigorating your team, and keeping it energetic. But there are some themes, and it's the same with any successful business.
Amazing. James, I've probably got enough for round two there. There was so much to still explore, but I really, really do appreciate your time. Some of your lessons are so pertinent, and listeners will really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Not at all, Dan. Good talking to you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you.